She whispered Russian to comfort a crying boy. Mafia boss froze and demanded find out who she is. The rain fell on the windows of the small Brooklyn cafe in relentless gray sheets, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of wet pavement and hurried footsteps. It was a miserable Tuesday, a good day to be invisible, which suited Viktor Morev perfectly. He sat in the rear booth, the vinyl cracked beneath his weight, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold. This was not his world. His world was one of armored cars, sterile high-rise offices overlooking Manhattan, and the silent, heavy weight of absolute authority. But those places were loud, even in their silence. Here, amidst the smell of burnt coffee and damp wool, he could almost breathe. His right-hand man, Dima, sat 2 tables away, facing the door, pretending to read a soggy newspaper. Dima hated these excursions. He saw threats in every dripping umbrella, in every customer who stayed too long. Viktor saw nothing but ghosts. He was haunted, not by the men he had buried, but by the one he had failed to save, Katya, his sister. The memory of her was a shard of glass lodged beneath his ribs. It never healed, and with every breath, it shifted. He remembered Moscow, the iron-gray sky, the smell of diesel fumes. He had been a boy himself, barely 15, responsible for his 14-year-old sister. He had looked away for 1 minute, just 1 minute at the crowded market, and she was gone. Trafficked. The word was bile in his throat. He had spent the last 20 years building an empire, ostensibly in shipping and logistics, but in reality, he was the Pakhan, the boss of the Morev Bratva. He had all the power in New York, yet he could not find one girl. He could not undo that single, fatal minute. The bell above the cafe door jingled, a sharp, cheerful sound that Viktor's mind registered as an intrusion. A small boy, no older than 4, wandered in, dragging a tiny, sodden teddy bear. He was alone. His face was blotched red, his lower lip trembling. He looked around the small, warm cafe, his gaze landing on the half-dozen patrons, and his composure shattered. A desperate, terrified wail filled the room. Customers looked up, annoyed. The barista at the counter froze, unsure what to do. Viktor watched, his chest tightening. The sound of a child's fear was a frequency he could not tune out. Then she moved. A waitress, who had been silently wiping down a table in the corner, set her rag down. Viktor hadn't even noticed her. She was slight, with dark hair pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and wore the cafe's drab brown apron. She moved not with efficiency, but with a quiet hesitation, as if she was apologizing for taking up space. She approached the boy slowly, her worn sneakers making no sound. She did not loom over him. She knelt, bringing herself down to his level, so she was looking up at him. The boy's cries hitched. The waitress tilted her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She said nothing in English. Instead, a sound flowed into the quiet cafe that stopped Viktor's heart. It was Russian, soft, melodic, and aching with a familiarity that punched the air from his lungs. "Tishina, moi koroshi," she whispered. "Hush, my good one." Viktor's hand, reaching for his cup, froze mid-air. The ceramic hung suspended between the table and his mouth. The boy sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked at her, his blue eyes wide with confusion. The waitress, this girl, reached out a hand, not to touch him, but to gently stroke the soggy ear of his teddy bear. "Taina Odin," she murmured, "you are not alone." She continued speaking, her voice a low lullaby, a thread of impossible comfort in the harsh city. "Visivi poryadke. Tai vi bezopasnosti. Everything is all right. You are safe." Tai vi bezopasnosti. The word struck Viktor like a physical blow. He was back in Moscow, the night before the market. Katya, terrified of the dark, had crawled into his cot. He had held his little sister, his own arms thin but strong, and whispered that exact phrase into her hair. Tai vi bezopasnosti. You are safe. He had lied in the cafe. The little boy, calmed by the sheer gentleness of her tone, pointed a shaky finger toward the door. "Mama," he choked out. The waitress nodded, her expression full of a profound, unearned understanding. She stood slowly, took the boy's small, damp hand, and led him to the counter, speaking quietly to the barista. A moment later, a woman burst through the door, soaking wet and panicked, crying out a name. The boy ran to her, and the crisis was over. The cafe returned to its dull roar. But Victor Morev's world had tilted. He was still frozen, his coffee cup clutched in a white-knuckled grip. His gaze was locked on the waitress as she returned to her tables. Her shoulders slumped slightly, resuming her cloak of invisibility. Dima, sensing the shift in his boss, was already looking over, his brows furrowed. Victor did not look at him. He kept his eyes fixed on the girl. Her features, high cheekbones, a pale complexion that spoke of sunless winters, and eyes that were too old for her face. She was Slavic, unmistakably. He set the cup down. The sound was a sharp crack in the silence. Dima was at his side instantly, blocking the view, a human shield. "Boss, what is it?" Victor's voice was a low rasp, thick with something Dima had never heard before. Not anger, something deeper. "Find out who she is." The waitress, Alina, felt the weight of his stare before she saw it. It was a physical pressure on the back of her neck, heavy and absolute. She'd been invisible for 5 years. Invisibility was survival. "You kept your head down. You spoke only when necessary. You did not make eye contact, and you prayed no one ever remembered your face." She had broken her own rules. The boy couldn't help it. His terror had felt too much like her own. She risked a glance. The man in the back booth was watching her. He was not like the other men who frequented the cafe. He was not a hipster with a laptop, or a construction worker grabbing a coffee. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her entire apartment. It was tailored to fit a physique that was powerful, coiled, and still. But it was his face that held her. It was a hard face, carved from granite and Moscow winters, with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the light. He wasn't looking at her with desire or even curiosity. He was looking at her as if he was seeing a ghost, a cold dread, sharp and familiar, pricked its way up her spine. She turned away, grabbing a stack of dirty plates. She ignored him. She ignored the way her hands had begun to tremble. Stares like that were dangerous. Stares like that meant you were seen, and being seen was the first step to being caught. Dima was meticulous. He was a shadow, patient and thorough. He picked up her trail the moment her shift ended at 3 o'clock. He watched her pull a thin, frayed coat over her apron, her movements quick and furtive. She did not linger. She took the bus, paying in exact change, her gaze fixed on her own lap. Dima followed in a nondescript sedan, keeping 2 cars between them. He followed her to a rundown apartment building in a part of Brooklyn that was resisting gentrification with stubborn grime. He watched her check the mail, nothing, and disappear inside, the heavy steel door closing with a grim finality. He waited. At 6:30, she emerged, wearing the same coat but carrying a backpack. She took another bus. He followed her to a community college, a concrete block of a building humming under fluorescent lights. He watched through a window as she sat in the back of an English as a second language class, her pen scratching across a notebook. He dug. He didn't use a computer, he made calls. He spoke to a contact who owed him a favor, who knew a man in the registrar's office. He spoke to another who had access to utility records. By 10 o'clock, he was back in Victor's study, the scent of old leather and expensive whiskey hanging in the air. "Her name is Alina Rostova," Dima said, placing a thin file on the massive mahogany desk. "That's the name on her lease. Anyway, it's a cash-only rental. No social security number, no credit. She's undocumented." Victor stared into the fireplace, where a low fire crackled, fighting back the city's damp. He said nothing. "She works 6 days a week at the cafe, cash under the table. She's taking an ESL class 2 nights a week at the college. She owes them for the last 2 semesters. They sent her a final notice yesterday. She has no visible connections, no friends, no family. She avoids any building with a uniform out front. She's a ghost." Dima placed a stack of photographs, taken with a long lens, on the desk. They were grainy, candid shots. Alina was waiting for the bus, her face pale with exhaustion. Alina reading a textbook under a flickering streetlight. Alina looked over her shoulder as she walked home, her keys clutched between her fingers. Victor finally moved. He picked up the top photograph. It was a close-up of her face as she left the cafe, the light catching the high plane of her cheekbone. Dima watched his boss. He had seen Victor order executions with less emotion. Now, the man's hand was unsteady. "Boss, what is this?" Dima asked, his voice low. "Is she connected? Is she a threat?" Victor looked at the photo. He saw Katya's eyes. He saw the same haunted vulnerability, the same bone structure. It was an echo, a ghost made of flesh and blood, living in his city, working in his territory. "She's not a threat," Victor said, his voice quiet. He put the photo down. "She's a risk." He didn't mean his organization. He meant to herself. The world was full of men who preyed on ghosts. "Keep a man on her," Victor ordered, turning back to the fire. "A 2-man team. I want eyes on her. 24 hours. I want to know when she breathes. And if someone else gets close," Dima asked, "then they are the threat," Victor replied. He didn't explain why. He didn't tell Dima about the resemblance. He couldn't. To speak of Katya was to admit the failure, and to admit the failure was to weaken the armor. But this girl, he could not save his sister. But he could save this echo of her. That night, Alina learned the hard way that her tuition bill was the least of her problems. She got off the bus 2 blocks from her apartment, the late-night walk she always dreaded. The streetlight at the corner was broken, casting the intersection in a deep, menacing shadow. She pulled her keys from her pocket, lacing them through her fingers. Points out. Just as she had practiced, a man stepped out of the darkness of a bodega's closed security gate. He was large, smelled of stale beer and unwashed clothes. "Hey, sweetie," he slurred, blocking her path. "What's the rush? Do you live around here? Maybe I can walk you home." Alina's blood ran cold. She tried to step around him. "Please, I have to go." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. He grabbed her arm. "Come on, don't be like that. I just want to talk." His grip was iron. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her throat. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. This was it. This was the moment she had feared every night for 5 years, and then it was over. 2 men, seemingly appearing from the pavement itself, were suddenly there. They wore dark clothes, no distinguishing features. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They simply flanked the drunk man. One of them, the taller one, placed a hand on the drunk's shoulder. It was not a violent motion, but the drunk froze, his eyes widening in terror. He seemed to shrink. The tall man leaned in and whispered something Alina couldn't hear. The drunk's grip on her arm vanished. He stumbled backward, hands raised. "No problem, man, no problem, just leaving." He turned and practically ran, disappearing into the night. Alina was left standing, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her arm throbbed where he had grabbed it. She looked at the 2 men. They were still standing there, like statues, watching the drunk retreat. They hadn't even looked at her. Thank you," she stammered. The tall one turned his head. His face was in shadow, but she felt his gaze. He gave a short, sharp nod, and then they were gone. They didn't walk away. They just melted back into the shadows they had come from, moving with a silent, practiced efficiency that was far more frightening than the drunk had been. Alina ran the rest of the way home. She slammed the door, shot the deadbolt, and leaned against it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't know what to think. She had been saved, but she had the distinct, terrifying feeling that she had just traded one predator for another. 2 days later, Alina went to the registrar's office at the college, a small wad of crumpled cash in her pocket. It was not enough. It was never enough. She was prepared to beg, to plead for an extension. The woman at the counter, who had always looked at her with mild annoyance, typed in her name. "Alina Rostova?" "Yes, I know I'm late. I just need 1 more week. Please." The woman looked up, her expression confused. "You're not late, honey. You're paid in full." Alina stared. "What? No, that is impossible." "See for yourself." The woman turned the monitor. A green line showed a balance of $0. It was paid 2 days ago. An anonymous donation from the New Start Scholarship Fund. Looks like you got lucky." Alina backed away from the counter, her mind reeling. New Start Scholarship Fund. It sounded fake. She hadn't applied for any scholarship. First, the men in the shadows. Now, this... Someone was watching her. Someone with money. Someone with the power to make men disappear and debts vanish. The confirmation came the next morning. She was at the cafe in the cramped employee locker room, changing into her apron. A small white envelope had slipped through the vent of her locker. Her name was not on it. Her fingers, suddenly numb, fumbled with the seal. Inside was a single piece of cardstock. On it, written in clear Cyrillic script, were 4 words: Vine nevidimka, Vine odni, you're not invisible, you're not alone. The note slipped from her grasp. She leaned against the cold metal, a wave of nausea and fear so potent it buckled her knees. Part of her, the small, lonely part that cried itself to sleep, felt a flicker of warmth. Not alone, but the part of her that had survived, the part that had run and hidden and fought to stay invisible, was screaming. To be known was to be a target. She looked around the locker room, at the door, at the small vent, and felt the walls closing in. Someone was watching her, but it wasn't malicious. It felt possessive, protective. And in Alina's world, protection was just a prettier word for a cage. The note, written in the clear Cyrillic of his homeland, burned a hole in her apron pocket. You're not invisible. You're not alone. For 3 days, Alina had lived in a state of heightened, vibrating terror. Every footstep behind her on the street, every customer who held her gaze for a second too long, was him, the watcher. She was wiping down the counter, her movements jerky. When the bell above the door jingled, the sound made her flinch, splashing gray water over her hands. It was him, the man from the back booth, the man with the granite face and the eyes that held the darkness of a Moscow winter. He didn't just walk in. He seemed to consume the space. The damp air of the cafe energized by his presence. Dima, his shadow, was with him, settling at the same table by the door. But Viktor Morev did not go to his usual booth. He walked past the counter, past the few empty tables, and sat at the smallest, most exposed two-top in the room. It was in her section. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. She couldn't breathe. He was forcing her hand, and he was tired of watching from a distance. "Alina!" Maria, the owner, hissed from the kitchen. "Section 3, customer." Alina nodded, her body moving on autopilot. She grabbed a glass of water, her hand shaking so badly the ice rattled. She approached the table. He was watching her. Not like the other day, not with that shocked recognition. This was different. This was an appraisal. He was measuring her, taking her apart. "Can I get you something?" Her voice was a reedy whisper, barely audible over the espresso machine. He didn't look at the menu. His dark eyes were fixed on her face. "Coffee. Black." His voice was lower than she expected, a deep rumble with a thick Russian accent he made no effort to hide. It scraped along her nerves. "Yes, sir." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "The boy, the other day." She froze, her back to him. "I don't know what you mean." "You spoke to him," Viktor said. It was not a question, it was a statement of fact. "In Russian." She turned slowly. He was leaning forward, his forearms resting on the small table. He looked coiled, like a predator at rest. "It is what my parents said." A little. "Where are you from?" he asked. The question hit her like a slap. "Where are you from?" It was the most dangerous question in the world. It was the question that led to papers, to proof, to deportation. "Here," she lied, clutching her small tray to her chest like a shield. "I am from here." "Your accent," he said, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching one side of his mouth. "It is not from here." "Is there anything else you need?" she asked, her tone bordering on desperate. He was silent for a long moment. Then, his gaze dropped from her face to her hand, the one clutching the tray. "What happened to your hand?" She looked down. Her knuckles. The skin was split, the area around it a mottled, ugly painting of purple and deep yellow. The bruises from the drunk man, the The one his silent men had saved her from had only ripened. She pulled her hand back, hiding it in the folds of her apron. "I tripped," she whispered, the lie tasting like ash. "On the stairs. I'm clumsy." Victor Morev looked at her. He had seen the hands of fighters, of men broken in his cellars, of soldiers. He knew the difference between an accidental fall and the defensive wounds of a fight. This girl, all of 5 feet and maybe 100 pounds, had been in a fight, and she was lying to his face. He said nothing. He just held her gaze, and in that silence, he knew. She was a survivor. She broke first, murmuring, "Your coffee," and fled to the perceived safety of the kitchen. She didn't get his coffee. She burst through the swinging doors, her heart hammering, and leaned against the cold stainless steel refrigerator. She looked at her bruised knuckles. The lie about tripping felt sour. She was always tripping, always running. The sight of the bruises, the smell of the walk-in cooler, the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, it all combined. And suddenly, she wasn't in Brooklyn. She was in a shipping container. 5 years ago. The air was thick, suffocating, smelling of rust and salt and human despair. She was 16. She was not Alina Rostova. She was Alyona Petrova, a girl from a dead-end village who had believed a man named Ivan when he promised her a job as a nanny in Germany. He had taken her passport on the 2nd day. On the 3rd day, she and 4 other girls were locked in this container. "You are not going to be nannies," Ivan sneered, his breath smelling of cheap vodka. "You are going to be entertained. For men who pay well, you should be grateful." One of the girls cried. Ivan had backhanded her, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed off the metal walls. Alyona had not cried. She had done what she always did. She had become invisible. She had watched. She learned the timing of their guards, the sound of the locks, the shift in the container that meant they were being loaded onto a ship. On the 5th night, at a port she didn't know, a new guard, sloppy and arrogant, had opened the door alone. He'd brought a single bucket of water and some bread. He grabbed her first. The memory was not a blur. It was a series of sharp, terrible snapshots. His hand on her arm, his laugh, the cold, sudden clarity that this was it, the end of her life, or the beginning of a living death. She had not screamed. She had grabbed the heavy, rusted pry bar left near the door, the one she had been staring at for 2 days. She swung it with all the force of her desperate, terrified body. It connected with his knee. A wet, sickening crunch. He roared, he lunged, but she was already gone. She slipped out of the container and ran. She ran across a dark, chaotic shipping yard, pure adrenaline silencing the screaming in her lungs. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran, climbing over a chain-link fence, her hands tearing open and hiding for 2 days in a stack of empty pallets. Finally, starving and half-mad, she had crept onto a different ship, a cargo vessel hiding in a lifeboat. She had survived the crossing on stolen rainwater and stale crackers. When the ship docked, she had seen the Statue of Liberty. She had slipped into New York, a ghost with no name, no papers, and no past. She became Alina Rostova. She learned English. She learned to be invisible. But the bruises always came back. A shout from Maria snapped her back to the present. "Alina! Coffee! Now!" Alina splashed cold water on her face, took a deep breath, and poured the coffee. When she returned to the table, her hand was steady. He took the cup from her, his fingers brushing hers. It was an accident, but it felt like a brand. She retreated, keeping her back to him, polishing the same counter over and over, acutely aware of his eyes on her. An hour later, the bell jingled again. This time, it wasn't a customer. It was a man in a cheap suit, slick and ill-fitting. He had thinning hair, a rodent-like face, and eyes that were too quick. He scanned the cafe, his gaze passing over the other patrons, and then he saw her. He smiled. It was a wet, predatory smile. Alina's blood turned to ice. It wasn't Ivan, but it was the same type of man. She dropped the rag. She didn't think so. She just moved. She pushed through the kitchen doors, past a startled Maria, and into the cramped, cold walk-in pantry. She pressed herself behind a rack of potatoes, her hand over her mouth, stifling the sobs that threatened to betray her. He was here. They had found her. After 5 years, they had finally found her. In the cafe. Victor watched the entire exchange. He saw the suited man smile. He saw the color drain from Alina's face. He saw the pure, animal terror that sent her fleeing. He didn't move. He simply nodded. Once. Toward Dima. The suited man, disappointed to find his quarry gone, shrugged and walked back out. Dima was on his feet a second later, dropping a $20 bill on his table and following him out into the rain. Dima and his partner, Sergei, cornered the man in the alley 2 blocks away. It was not a fight. It was a professional intervention. "You're looking for someone?" Dima asked, his voice pleasant, as he pressed the man against the wet brick. "I'm just looking for a girl," the man stammered, his bravado gone. "The waitress?" Sergei asked, checking the man's pockets, finding a wallet and a cheap switchblade. "She's a witness to something," the man spat. "My boss, Mr. O'Malley. He just wants to talk to her." Dima's face hardened. The O'Malleys, the Irish, rivals. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Dima said, his voice dropping. He pressed the flat of his hand against the man's throat, just enough to stop the air. "And you are never coming back to this cafe. You are going to forget her face. You are going to forget this neighborhood." "Ponyal?" The man nodded, his eyes wide with terror. Dima let him go. The man stumbled, gasping, and ran. "He's an enforcer for the Irish," Dima reported to Victor on the phone 5 minutes later. "They think she's a witness to something." Victor sat in his car, the rain drumming on the roof. His face was a mask of cold fury. This was complicated. She wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was a target in his present. She was trapped between his world and her own, and she didn't even know it. "She's not safe there anymore," Victor said. "Not in her apartment. Not in that cafe." "What are the orders, boss?" "Escalate," Victor said. "She's running from ghosts. Show her the monster she can trust." That night, Alina found her world had been breached. She returned to her apartment, her body aching with a fear so deep it felt like it was in her bones. She fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking from the encounter, and pushed open her door. She stopped. The hallway of her tiny, squalid apartment smelled different, not like dust and old cabbage, but like flowers. On the floor, just inside the door, was a large, simple bouquet of white peonies, wrapped in plain brown paper. Next to it sat a small, black box. Her heart stopped. He had been in her apartment. The locks were useless. She backed out, ready to run, but a sound from the box stopped her, a low electronic buzz. It was a phone, a brand new, untraceable burner phone. As she stared at it, the screen lit up. A single text message appeared. "You're not safe. Let me help." The dam broke. The 5 years of running, of hiding, of being strong, all of it crumbled. She slid to the floor, her back against the hallway wall, and finally, she wept. She cried for the girl she had been, for the life she had lost, and for the terrifying, trapped woman she had become. The suited man would be back. The man with the peonies knew where she lived. There was no escape. She sat there for an hour, the scent of the flowers filling her with a strange, tragic comfort. Finally, her sobs subsided into hiccuping gasps. She looked at the phone. Her fear of the suited man, her fear of being dragged back to that life was, for the first time, greater than her fear of the unknown. Her fingers, numb and stiff, picked up the phone. There was only one number in the contacts. "Call." She pressed the button. It rang twice. A man answered, not with hello, but with a simple, quiet "da." It was him, the man from the cafe. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice raw. "What do you want from me?" There was a pause. She could hear the crackle of a fireplace. "My name does not matter." Victor's voice came through the line, calm and deep. "I want to help you." "Help me?" She choked, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "You are watching me. You are in my apartment. You paid for my school. This does not help. This is possession." "The man in the cafe today," Victor said, his voice hardening, "is an enforcer for the O'Malley syndicate. They believe you witnessed something. They will not stop. When they come back, They will not just talk. A cold silence filled her apartment. He was right. She knew he was right. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know you. I am someone who can protect you," he said. "I won't be your prisoner," she said, a flicker of her old fire returning. "I'm not offering you a cage," he said. "I'm offering you a shield." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I will meet you, but not like this. On my terms." "Name the place," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "Central Park," she said, thinking of the most open, public place she knew. "The Bethesda fountain at dusk tomorrow," she added, her voice fierce. "You come alone. If I see anyone else, if I see that man, Dima, I am gone." There was a long pause. "Dusk," he agreed, and the line went dead. The next evening, the sky was a bruised purple and orange. Alina arrived layered in 2 sweaters and her thickest coat, making her look small and bulky. She was 15 minutes early, her eyes darting to every shadow. She was terrified, but she was there. He arrived exactly at dusk. She didn't see him approach. She just turned, and he was there, standing on the other side of the dry fountain. He had kept his word. He was alone. He wore a long, black wool overcoat, his hands in his pockets. He was not a savior. He looked like a czar, powerful and severe, and strangely out of place in the public park. They stared at each other across the expanse of stone. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice stolen by the wind. "Why me?" Victor walked to the edge of the fountain, but he did not approach her. He respected the boundaries she had drawn. "You remind me of someone," he said, his voice low. "Someone I could not help." "I am not her," Alina said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "No," he agreed. "You are not. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. The men looking for you are my enemies," Victor said, his gaze locked on hers. "Which means, whether you want it or not, you are now under my protection. You do not have a choice in the danger." "Alina, only in defense." He took a step toward her. She flinched and took one back. He stopped immediately. He held up his hands, slowly, showing they were empty. "I will not harm you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice cut through her fear. "I will not possess you, but you cannot go back to that apartment. You cannot go back to that cafe. They will find you." "So what?" she cried, the tension snapping. "I run again? I become another ghost? I hide in your rich house until you are tired of me?" His face hardened. "I am offering you shelter, not a prison." He reached into his coat. She tensed, but he pulled out a simple, white key card. He set it on the stone ledge of the fountain. "This is a room at a private hotel. It is registered under the name Jane Smith. It is secure. My men will be outside, but they will not bother you. You will be safe." She stared at the key card. It was a lifeline. It was a leash. "I won't force you," he said, "but they will." She didn't move. She couldn't. He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. And then he said the words that would change everything. "If you ever need shelter, call." He turned, the long coat flaring, and walked away, disappearing into the growing twilight. Alina was left alone, the cold wind whipping her hair, staring at the small piece of white plastic that represented a choice she never wanted to make. For 2 days, the key card sat on Alina's dresser, a small, white rectangle of damning potential. It was a lifeline and a leash, and she had refused to touch it. She'd gone to work, gone to her classes, and returned to her apartment, locking the 3 deadbolts on her door as an act of futile defiance. She would not be scared out of her own life. She would not trade her squalid, terrified freedom for a gilded cage. She was at the cafe, scrubbing a burnt pot in the kitchen, when her phone, her cheap, pay-as-you-go phone, rang. It was her landlady, Mrs. Semyonova, an old Ukrainian woman who lived on the first floor. "Alina!" the woman was screaming, her voice thin and reedy with panic. "Alina, Pozar, fire! The building is on fire!" The pot slipped from Alina's hands, clattering to the floor. "What? Mrs. Semyonova, what happened?" "Your apartment, it was your apartment. A man I saw run. He threw something. Oh, Bozhe moi, your neighbor." "Mr. Henderson, his door was open, he's hurt. Alina, the smoke, it's everywhere." The world narrowed to a single, high-pitched whine in Alina's ears. She was already stripping off her apron, pushing past a confused Maria and running out the front door, the bell jangling wildly behind her. She ran, her lungs burning, ignoring the shouts from her boss. She ran to the subway, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the card to swipe. It was meant for me. He threw something. "Your neighbor is hurt." The ride seemed to take an eternity. She stood by the door, vibrating, earning stares from the other passengers. She was a ghost no longer. She was a target. And she had just gotten an innocent man hurt. When she emerged onto her street, it was a scene from a nightmare. The block was choked with flashing lights, red and blue painting the wet pavement. A fire engine was angled awkwardly, its ladder extended to her floor. Smoke, thick and acrid, poured from her shattered window, a black stain against the brick. She pushed through the crowd, her heart in her throat. "Mr. Henderson." "The man who was hurt. Where is he?" A paramedic, kneeling by an open kit, pointed. "They're taking him now. Took in a lot of smoke. Some burns on his arm." Alina saw them loading her neighbor, a retired man who always nodded to her, into the back of an ambulance. His face was gray with soot, his arm wrapped in white gauze. He had been hurt because of her, because she was stubborn, because she had refused the help of one monster. She had been found by another. A policeman, his notebook out, approached her. "Ma'am, do you live in this building?" She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the blackened hole that had been her home. "We need to ask you a few questions. We heard the firebomb was aimed at your unit. Do you have any—" "She will not be answering any questions." The voice was not the cop's. It was deep, calm and absolute. It cut through the chaos like a diamond blade. A black sedan, silent and imposing as a shark, had pulled up to the curb. Dima stood by the open rear door, and Viktor Morev was watching her from the shadows of the back seat. The policeman frowned. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. I need to speak with the resident." Dima didn't even look at the cop. His eyes were on Alina. He took her arm, his grip firm but not unkind. "Mister, Morev has been waiting for you." "Alina, it is time to go." "Hey," the cop started. "You can't—" Dima flashed the inside of his jacket, revealing something, a badge, identification, that made the cop stop mid-sentence. His eyes widened, and he took a half step back, his face suddenly pale. "We'll be in touch, officer," Dima said, his voice dismissive. He guided Alina, who was moving in a state of pure, numbing shock, into the car. The door closed with a heavy, final thunk, sealing off the sounds of the sirens and the shouting. The inside of the car was silent and smelled of leather and power. Viktor sat across from her. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the ambulance as it pulled away, his jaw tight. "Mr. Henderson," Alina whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "He was just my neighbor." "He will be taken care of," Viktor said, his voice a low rumble. "The best doctors. His apartment will be rebuilt. He will be compensated, and he will never know why." He turned his dark eyes to her. They were not angry. They were weary. "But this is what happens. Alina, this is the world you are in. It is not a world where you can be stubborn." She looked down at her hands, which were covered in soot from the subway pole. "You were right." "Yes," he said. It was not a boast. It was a tragedy. The car moved, pulling away from the flashing lights, away from the life she had tried to build. She watched the ruins of her apartment building disappear, and she did not cry. She felt hollow. They drove for nearly an hour. The city, with its noise and its grime, melted away, replaced by the dark, towering trees of upstate New York. The car turned off a main road onto a gravel path that seemed to go on for miles until it arrived at a set of massive, 20-foot-high steel gates. Two men in dark uniforms, armed with more than just sidearms, nodded to the car, and the gates swung open. The estate was a fortress. The house itself wasn't a classic, gaudy mansion. It was a modern masterpiece of glass, steel, and dark stone, built into the side of a hill. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly imposing. Dima led her inside. The interior was vast, with ceilings 3 stories high and an entire wall of glass overlooking a dark, churning lake. It was luxurious, but it felt empty. There were no photographs, no clutter. It was not a house. It was a high-security holding facility. A small, older woman in a gray dress, a housekeeper, appeared. "This is Elena," Dima said. "She will show you to your room. You are to ask her for anything you need." Elena followed the woman up a floating staircase, her sneakers silent on the polished stone. The room was larger than her entire apartment. It had its own bathroom, a closet full of new clothes, all in her size, and a bed that looked big enough for 5 people. But the window was a single, seamless pane of glass. It did not open. She was a bird in a cage, a very beautiful cage. She splashed water on her face, put on a pair of the plain gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt she found, and walked back downstairs. She found Victor in a study that was as large as the cafe. He was standing in front of a glass wall, looking out at the approaching storm. "I know who you are," she said, her voice shaking but clear. He did not turn. "Do you?" "I asked Elena your last name. Morev. I've heard it. On the street. In the papers. Victor Morev, the Pakhan, the head of the Russian-American Bratva. You are a mafia boss." "I am a businessman," he said, his voice flat. "No," she said, her fear giving way to a cold, sharp anger. "A businessman doesn't have men who can make cops back down. A businessman doesn't have an army at his gate. You didn't just offer me protection. You brought me to the wolf's den." She walked toward the door. "I can't be here. This is worse. You haven't saved me. You've just put a bigger target on my back. I am leaving. I will take my chances. I've done it before." She reached the door. In a blur, he was there, blocking her path. He wasn't menacing. He just existed, a solid wall of muscle and will. "Let me go," she said, her voice trembling. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "To another apartment, to another city. They found you in Brooklyn. They will find you anywhere. The O'Malleys are dogs. They will not stop until they have you, because they think you have me. I would rather die out there than be your prisoner here," she screamed, slamming her small fists against his chest. It was like hitting a wall of stone. He didn't even flinch. He caught her wrists, his grip like iron, but he did not hurt her. He just held her, waiting for the hysterical fit to pass. "I am not your prisoner," he said, his voice raw. "Then what am I?" she sobbed, all the fight going out of her. He let go of her wrists. He looked down at her, his face a mask of pain so deep she couldn't understand it. He stepped back, giving her space. "You helped a child," he said, his voice so soft she barely heard it. "Let me help you." The simple sentence, the echo of her own kindness, broke her. The dam of 5 years shattered. The terror, the loneliness, the constant, grinding fear, it all came pouring out. Her knees buckled. She didn't fall. She slid down the smooth, dark wood of the door. Her body racked with sobs, her face in her hands. She cried for Mr. Henderson. She cried for the girl she had been. She cried for the ghost she had become. Victor did not touch her. He did not comfort her. He simply stood, a silent guardian, and let her break. He gave her the one thing no one else ever had, the space to be weak. When the sobs finally quieted, leaving her hollow and aching, she looked up. He was sitting in a leather chair across the room, watching her. "My name," she whispered, her voice ho_arse, "is not Elena Rostova." He just nodded, his face unreadable. "It is Alyona Petrova. I am from a small village. No one has ever heard of it. I was 16. A man named Ivan promised me a job, a nanny, in Germany." She told him everything. The shipping container, the smell of rust and salt, the other girls, the guard, the pry bar, the sickening crunch, the run, the ship, the 5 years of hiding, of being so invisible she felt like she was disappearing. Victor listened. He did not move. The only sign of his tension was the white-knuckled grip he had on the arm of his chair. When she was finished, the room was silent. Outside, the first drops of rain began to hit the massive windows. "Katya," he said. "What?" "My sister." He stood, walking to the window, his back to her. Her name was Katya. She was 14. I was 15. In Moscow. At the Izmailovsky market. I was supposed to be watching her. I looked away. Just for a minute. To look at a stupid, painted box. When I looked back, she was gone. He pressed his hand to the glass, as if he could feel the storm. We never found her. Nobody, no ransom, just gone. I believe she was taken. Trafficked. Like they tried to do to you. I have spent the last 20 years, and all of my money, looking for her. He turned to look at her. His eyes were not the eyes of a mafia boss. They were the eyes of a lost, 15-year-old boy. That's why I do it, he whispered, as if confessing a sin. The shelters, the donations, the girls I pull off the street, I fund them all, anonymously. I have saved dozens, maybe hundreds, and it does not matter. Because I could not save the one. He looked at her, his gaze intense. When I heard you in that cafe speaking Russian, when I saw your face, it was like seeing her ghost. I couldn't save her, Alyona, but I will be damned if I let them take you, too. They stared at each other, two scarred souls, two survivors of the same. Ugly war, recognizing each other across a battlefield of pain. The storm broke. Thunder cracked, so loud it rattled the glass. Alina flinched, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her. The sound was too much like the container door slamming shut. Elena, the housekeeper, appeared as if summoned. "Sir, madam, the rooms are prepared." Victor nodded, his gaze never leaving Alina's. "Go, get some sleep." Elena led her to the beautiful room, which now felt less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. Alina lay in the massive bed, under a comforter that felt like a cloud. She was safe. She was protected. So why was she still shaking? The thunder crashed again, and she curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears. She was tired of being afraid. She was so tired. She made a decision. She threw back the covers. She patted down the dark, silent hallway. She didn't know where his room was, but she found it, a set of dark, double doors. She raised a trembling hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. He was still dressed in a black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, the same as hers. He had not been sleeping. He just looked at her, his face a question. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. Just for tonight. I can't be alone." His face softened. A terrible, profound gentleness entered his eyes. He nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin, and stepped aside, letting her in. His room was as stark as hers, but dominated by a massive bed. He did not touch her. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain. "You're safe here. No one can get to you." "I know," she whispered, standing in the middle of the room, feeling small and lost. "But my head doesn't know." He turned. He walked to her, slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer. He stopped a foot in front of her. "What do you want?" "Alyona?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him, at this terrifying, powerful, broken man. She reached up, her hand shaking, and touched his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady, heavy beat. "I just don't want to feel invisible," she said. He covered her hand with his. His skin was warm. His hand, she realized with a jolt, was trembling. This man who could order death was trembling at her touch. He drew her in, his movements agonizingly slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. She went, melting into his arms, pressing her face against his chest. His arms came around her, one hand splayed wide across her back, the other cradling her head. He held her as if she was made of spun glass, as if she was the most precious, fragile thing in his world. He smelled of soap and the storm. "You are not invisible." He murmured into her hair. "I see you." She tilted her head back, looking up at him. The air in the room was electric, charged with the storm outside and the tension between them. His eyes were dark, searching hers. He lowered his head, his lips brushing her forehead, a chaste, protective kiss. It wasn't enough. She rose on her tiptoes, her fingers gripping his shirt. "Victor," she breathed. His name was a plea. His eyes locked on hers, and he lowered his head again. His lips brushed hers, a hesitant question. She gave him his answer. She leaned in, her eyes closing, and met his kiss. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of aching, profound loneliness. It was a kiss 5 years in the making. It was slow, deep, and desperate, a plea for connection, an anchor in a raging sea. His hands moved from her back to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, as if to wipe away all the tears she had ever shed. Her hands, no longer trembling, went around his neck, pulling him closer, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. When the kiss finally broke, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads pressed together. He looked at her, his eyes dark with an emotion she was too afraid to name. "Go to sleep, Aliona," he whispered, her real name a balm on her raw nerves. He didn't lead her back to her room. He led her to his bed. He pulled back the heavy comforter. She crawled in, still wearing the t-shirt and sweatpants. He toed off his shoes and lay down on top of the covers, on his back, a respectable foot of space between them. The bed was huge, but the room felt empty again. The thunder cracked. She flinched. Slowly, she moved, closing the distance between them. She curled onto her side, her back to him, but she was close. She could feel the heat from his body. He did not move for a long moment. Then, his arm came around her, draping over her waist, his hand resting on her hip. He pulled her back against his solid, warm chest. He was a furnace, a wall, a shield. He tucked his head down, his chin resting on the top of her hair. "Tai vi bezopasnosti," he whispered, the same words she had said to the child. "You are safe." And as the storm raged outside, Aliona Petrova, for the first time in 5 years, closed her eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, held in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York. Waking up in Victor Morev's bed was a disorientation of the senses. Alina woke first, to the thin, gray light of dawn. She was still in his t-shirt and sweatpants, and he was exactly where he had been, on his back, on top of the covers, a silent, unmoving guardian. His arm was no longer around her. He was a man made of distance. She slipped from the bed, the profound safety of the night evaporating, leaving behind the cold reality. She was in the fortress of a mafia boss who was haunted by his sister. She was not his sister. She was a complication he had imported. The strange, fragile peace of that night lasted for 3 days. They existed in a quiet truce. He was respectful, distant, and treated her like a guest. She ate meals prepared by Elena, read books from his vast, unread-looking library, and watched the armed men patrol the perimeter. She was safe, and she had never felt more trapped. The truce shattered on the 4th morning. Victor came into the library, his face a mask of cold granite. He hadn't just entered. He had brought a storm in with him. Dima was at his heels, looking pale. "They hit the shelter in Queens," Dima said, his voice low, tight. "Not a firebomb, a message. They broke the windows, terrified the women, pushed one of the counselors down a flight of stairs. She's in surgery." Victor stood staring at the unlit fireplace, his back to Alina. She had frozen in the doorway, a book clutched to her chest. "And," Dima continued, his voice strained, "they hit the clinic in the Bronx, the one we fund for undocumented women. They didn't break anything, they just talked. They told the night staff that Victor Morev's charity was a lie, that he was the one trafficking. They're poisoning the well." Victor's hand, resting on the marble mantel, clenched. Alina could see his knuckles turn white. "This is O'Malley," Victor said. It was not a question. "It's worse, boss," Dima said. "The shelter in Queens, the security on that location, the address it's known only to 5 people. Me, you, and the 3 senior captains. The clinic is even tighter. Only you and I knew the routing for that funding." The implication hung in the sterile, silent air. A leak, a mole. Not just a low-level rat, but someone high, someone in his inner circle. Victor turned, and for the first time, he looked truly, terrifyingly angry. His gaze was glacial. "The O'Malleys are not smart enough to find these places. They are being led. Someone is giving them the keys to my house." He was not talking about the estate. He was talking about his work. The secret penance he paid for his sister's loss. They were attacking his soul. They are doing it to lure you out, Dima said. I know what they are doing. Victor's voice was a low growl. They are doing it, Alina said, her voice shaking but clear. Because of me. Both men turned, their dark, intense energy focusing on her. They had forgotten she was there. They were looking for me, she said, stepping into the room. At the cafe, the man said I was a witness. Now they are attacking places for women like me. This isn't just about you. This is about me. They are using me to get to you, and you to get to me. Victor's face softened almost imperceptibly. Alyona, this is not your concern. You are safe here. I'm not safe, she shot back, her fear finally burning into a clean, hard anger. I am in a cage, and out there, women are getting hurt because of me. A woman is in surgery because I am hiding in your library. I am tired of hiding. What you are suggesting is insane, Victor said, already knowing where her mind was going. Use me, she said, her voice gaining strength. They are looking for me. Let them find me. Niet. The word was a violent explosion. Absolutely not. I will not put you on a platter for those animals. You won't be, she said, walking right up to him. She was dwarfed by his size, but her gaze was level. You will be watching. Your men will be everywhere. They want me. Fine. But this time, I am the trap, not the bait. I am tired of running. Victor, I am tired of being the ghost. Let me fight back. He stared down at her, a war raging behind his eyes. It was the protective instinct of the man who held her in the dark versus the cold calculation of the Pakhan. She's right, boss, Dima said quietly. It's the only way. They'll keep escalating until they burn the city down or we give them what they want. Let's give it to them, on our terms. Victor looked at Alina. He saw the fire in her, the same desperate strength she'd used to swing that pry bar. She was not Katya. She was not a fragile girl to be hidden. She was a survivor. The risk, he said. His voice ho_arse. It's great if we do nothing, she finished. He was silent for a full minute. Then, he nodded. Once. We do it your way. The plan was simple, and that made it terrifying. It would be a public park, not central. Prospect Park. Mid-morning. She would walk alone, along the main path near the boathouse. Victor's men would be everywhere. They would be joggers, fathers with strollers, city workers, businessmen. Dima and his top man, Sergei, would be closest, dressed as maintenance crew. Victor would be in a black van with tinted windows, watching from across the street. Alina dressed in the same clothes she had worn from her apartment, the ones she had been rescued in. She wanted to look the part, the lost, terrified girl. But as she walked, she did not feel terrified. She felt cold. She felt clear. For the first time, she was walking toward the danger. The earpiece in her ear, hidden by her dark hair, was silent. She's on the path, Dima's voice said in Victor's ear. Victor watched her on the high-definition monitor. She looked small, vulnerable. Every instinct screamed at him to call it off, to pull her back. Movement, Dima said. 2 men, 10 o'clock, approaching. Alina saw them. They were not the same type as the drunk. These men were clean, professional, in sharp suits. They looked like lawyers or bankers. They flanked her, one falling into step on her right, the other on her left. Don't stop walking, the one on the right said. His voice was pleasant, with a faint Irish lilt. Alina kept walking, her heart a trip hammer. You've been a very hard girl to find. Alyona Petrova, the man on the left said, her real name. Hearing it in the open, spoken by an enemy, was like a physical blow. She stumbled. Careful now, the first man said. We just want to talk, mister. O'Malley is very interested in what you saw, and immigration is very interesting to you. It would be a shame to be sent back to the place you ran from. A terrible, terrible shame. This was her nightmare. The 2 fears that had ruled her life, the traffickers and deportation, converging on a sunny path in Brooklyn. She was supposed to stay calm, to keep walking until she reached the bench, but the man on her left grabbed her arm. In fact, we think you should come with us right now. She froze. This was not the plan. In the van, Victor saw the hand on her arm. Dima, now!" Before the men could react, Dima and Sergei were there. They had been fixing a sprinkler head not 10 feet away. They moved with a speed that was inhuman. It was not a fist fight. It was a professional disassembly. Dima's hand chopped down on the first man's throat. The man crumpled, gagging. Sergei spun the second man, the one holding Alina's arm, and drove a fist into his kidney, then a crippling blow to his solar plexus. The man folded. It was over in 3 seconds. "Get the second one," Dima barked to the other men, who were now swarming, blocking the view of the few civilians. "He's ours!" Dima grabbed the first man, who was already running, but Sergei was faster, tackling him and dragging him back. A black van, a different van, screeched up to the curb. Both men were thrown in the back. Alina stood, shaking, her arm throbbing. Dima was at her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Victor's sedan was there. Dima opened the door. "Get in. It's over." She got in. Victor was not there. It was just a driver. She was taken back to the estate, the adrenaline leaving her system, leaving her cold and trembling. Victor returned 6 hours later. She knew where he had been. She could smell the cold, damp air of his cellars on him, though his suit was clean. He walked into the study, where she was waiting, and poured 2 fingers of whiskey. He drank it in 1 swallow. He talked. Victor said he did not look at her. "The mole," she said. "The man we caught was low level, but he knew who gave him the intel. He confirmed it. The leak is from my inner circle." He slammed the glass down on the desk. "Someone I trust. Someone who has eaten at my table?" The fury was back, but it was colder now. It was the fury of a king who had found treason in his court. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her, and his face was unreadable. "Now you disappear." He didn't mean she was leaving. He meant she was going deeper. He took her from the beautiful, glass-walled room. He led her down a private elevator to a wing of the estate she had not known existed. It was a self-contained apartment, reinforced with steel. The windows were bulletproof, the air was on its own system, and the guards were different. 2 women stood by the door. They were not housekeepers. They wore simple black fatigues. One was a tall, blonde woman with sharp, Scandinavian features. The other was shorter, darker, with eyes that missed nothing. "This is Freya, and this is Zara," Victor said. "They are former Mossad. They will be your security. They do not answer to Dima. They do not answer to my captains. They answer only to me. No one enters this wing. No one leaves, not even me, without your permission." He turned to Alina. His eyes were bleak. "I have put you in the center of my war. I have made you a target. This is all I can do to fix it." He turned to leave. "Victor," she said. He stopped, his hand on the door. "You're pulling away," she said, her voice quiet. He looked at her over his shoulder. "I'm protecting you, even from myself. The poison is in my house. Until I find it, I'm the most dangerous man you know." He left, and the heavy steel door closed with a quiet, hydraulic hiss. Alina stayed in that suite for 2 days. Freya and Zara were quiet, professional but not unkind. They treated her not as a prisoner, but as a principal. Zara, the darker, quieter one, sat with her. "You are brave," Zara said one afternoon, her accent a mix of Hebrew and something else. "To do what you did in the park." "I was terrified," Alina confessed. "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Zara said, her eyes scanning the hallway. "It is action in spite of it. You are not a victim, Alina. You are a survivor. We are all survivors here." For the first time, Alina realized she wasn't alone. These women, these warriors, they understood. They had their own scars. But Victor remained distant. He sent food. He sent books. He did not come. He was hunting the mole, and in doing so, he had locked himself away from her just as securely as he had locked her in. That night, she couldn't take it. She used the intercom, a right Victor had given her. "Zara, let me out." Zara nodded. They escorted her to his study. He was there, as she knew he would be, staring at a board of names, his captains, his inner circle. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You are shutting me out." she said, walking to the center of the room. "I am keeping you safe. I am trying to find the man who wants you dead. You are hiding," she accused. "Not from them, from me. You are afraid to drag me deeper? Victor, look around. I am already in it. I am in your fortress, guarded by your soldiers, hunted by your enemies. I am here." She crossed the room, standing in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "But if you want me out, just say it," she whispered, her voice full of a pain that had nothing to do with the O'Malleys. "If I am a ghost, a reminder, just say it, and I will walk out that front gate and take my chances." He stared at her, his face a torment. "You think I could let you go?" "You are letting me go," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "You are pushing me away. You held me when I was broken, and now you won't even look at me." "Alina," he growled, his voice a warning. "Just say it. Victor, do you want me to go?" He couldn't. With a sound that was half groan, half curse, he grabbed her. His hands were not gentle. One wrapped in her hair, tilting her head back. The other seized her waist, pulling her flush against his body. He kissed her. It was not the slow, aching kiss from the storm. This was rough, desperate, like a man dying of thirst. It was a kiss of fear, of possession, of a control he had completely lost. It was all the words he couldn't say. "I'm terrified. Don't leave. You are mine." She didn't fight. She met his desperation with her own, her hands coming up to grip his face, her nails biting into his skin. She kissed him back with all the fear and anger and loneliness she possessed. He broke the kiss. His forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged. "You are a fool to be here," he whispered. "Then you are a fool to let me stay," she whispered back. He looked at her, his eyes dark with an intensity that stole her breath. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her from the study, up the stairs, past her secure wing, and to his bedroom. He kicked the door shut. He set her on her feet, but he did not let her go. His hands moved from her waist, up her back, his fingers tracing her spine. "This is a mistake," he breathed, his lips brushing her ear. "No more running," she whispered. This time, there was no hesitation. His hands, the hands of a killer, were agonizingly slow. He unbuttoned the simple shirt she wore, his knuckles brushing her skin. His touch was electric, his control absolute. He was checking, always checking, his eyes asking the questions his mouth would not. She answered by placing her trembling hands on his shirt, on his chest. She undid the first button, then the second. She needed to feel him. She needed to know the man was not made of granite. He shrugged off his jacket, letting it fall. He removed his shirt, her fingers splayed across his chest, tracing the hard muscles, the faint tracings of old scars. He was real. He slowly, reverently, pushed her shirt from her shoulders, his gaze fixed on her face. He was watching for any sign of fear. She met his gaze, vulnerable but unbroken. Their bodies spoke in a language of lingering touches, of skin meeting skin, of silent, desperate understanding. He kissed her again, but this time it was not the rough kiss from the study. It was deep. It was slow. It was an act of emotional intimacy that was more profound than any words they had shared. He kissed her collarbone, his hands trembling as they traced the line of her hips. She arched into him, a silent plea. There was no rush. There was only the rain starting to tap against the window, the low light of the room, and the shattering, terrifying relief of two vulnerable souls finally shedding their armor. They fell asleep entwined, her head on his chest, his arms locked around her. They were a tangle of limbs, a mess of exposed scars and shared breath. He was a mafia boss with a traitor in his midst. She was a marked woman with a forged name. But in the darkness, they were just Victor and Aliona. And for the first time, they were not alone. In the cold, sterile quiet of his estate, Victor Morev became a hunter. The intimacy he had found with Alina did not soften him. It made him sharper. The betrayal was not just a strategic leak. It was a violation of his home, of his past, and now, of her. He sat in his study, not sleeping, not eating. He looked at the names on his board, his three most trusted captains, and Dima. He reviewed the security logs, the financial transfers, the phone records. The captains were clean. Their movements were accounted for. Their finances were stable. Then he looked at Dima. Dima, his right hand, his shadow. The man who had been with him since the early days in Brighton Beach. The man who knew where everybody was buried. And more importantly, where every shelter was built. He found it. A series of small, untraceable wire transfers to an offshore account. Not payments to Dima, but payments from him. Payments that began 3 months ago, just before the O'Malleys started getting accurate intel. He was being blackmailed. Victor didn't send for him. He waited. At 7 in the evening, Dima entered the study, as he always did, to give his end-of-day report. "Boss," Dima said, his voice clipped. "All quiet today. The O'Malleys are... Sit." Victor's voice was a low command, cutting through the room like a blade. Dima froze. He saw the board. He saw the printouts on Victor's desk. He saw the look in his boss's eyes, a cold, dead calm that was more terrifying than any rage. Dima's face went pale. He did not sit. "I treated you as a brother," Victor said, his voice quiet. He stood but did not move from behind the desk. "I gave you my trust. You ate at my table. You knew about Katya." "Victor." Dima's voice cracked. "You stood in this library and you agreed with Alina," Victor continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "You told me to use her as bait. You let her walk into a trap that you helped set." "No," Dima said, shaking his head. "Never. I never knew they would grab her. I just gave them shelter. The clinic, just locations. Never people. And the counselor in the hospital? The women you terrified? They are not people?" Victor's hand moved, resting on the butt of the pistol on his desk. "Tell me why. Give me one reason why I should not tear your heart from your chest." Dima's composure shattered. The loyal soldier evaporated, leaving a terrified, broken man. He fell to his knees. "My sister," he choked, tears streaming down his face. "Mila, my little sister, in Odessa. They found her. O'Malley's men, they sent me a video. Victor, they knew about Katya. They knew it was your weakness. They used your pain against me." Victor's face, carved from granite, twitched. This was a wound he understood. "They told me if I didn't give them something, they would put her in a container, just like we always feared. I just gave them buildings. I thought I was trading bricks for her life. I never thought they would find Alina. I swear on my mother's grave." Victor stared at the man who had been his brother. The betrayal was absolute, but the reason was a poisoned mirror of his own life. He had built an empire to save one girl. Dima had betrayed that empire to save his own. "Get up," Victor commanded. Dima, shaking, pulled himself to his feet. "You will give me the account numbers, the names, the contacts, everything, and then you will pack a bag." "Boss?" Dima's eyes were wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. "I'm sparing your life," Victor said, his voice flat, dead. "But you are exiled. You are no longer Bratva. You are no longer my shadow. You are nothing. You will leave New York tonight. If I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name, your sister's life, which you just bought with mine, will be forfeit. Now, get out of my sight." Dima's shoulders slumped. He had been given death, and he had been given life. He nodded, a broken, jerking motion, and left the room. Victor stood in the silence. The betrayal, a cold, heavy weight in his chest. He was now, truly, alone. He had no one to trust, except for the woman sleeping in his bed, the woman he had dragged into this war. 2 days later, the war came to him. A package arrived. Not a bomb. A courier who was immediately detained hand-delivered it to his gate. But the man was a fool, a simple messenger. The package contained a small, leather-bound ledger and a burner phone. Victor opened the ledger on his desk. Alina, who had refused to leave his side since Dima's exile, watched. The pages were a list of names of girls. Next to them, locations, dates, and prices. It was a trafficker's accounts book, and on the first page, written in O'Malley's arrogant script, were 2 names, Alyona Petrova, Katya Mareva. Alina's hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked gasp. Victor stared, his sister's name. After 20 years, his entire body became cold, then hot. It was a lie. It was a trick, but what if it wasn't? The burner phone rang. Victor put it on speaker. Morev? A beautiful book, isn't it? The voice was slick, laced with an Irish lilt. It was Sean O'Malley. My father had a saying, everyone has a price, and everyone has a ghost. I just happen to have yours. Both of them. What do you want? Victor growled. A conversation. Man to man, you, me, and the girl. She's the one who started all this, after all. A simple trade. Morev. The ledger is the full list for a truce. You pull out of the docks, you stop choking my territory, and you stop hunting me. And if I refuse, then the list, with your sister's name and the little ghost name on it, goes to every news outlet in this city. A present from the O'Malley Syndicate. Prominent Russian businessman linked to international trafficking ring. It'll destroy you. And his voice darkened. I'll send a copy back home. To the men your little Aliona ran from. I hear Ivan is very eager to get his property back. Alina's blood turned to ice. Ivan. He knew Ivan's name. The Red Hook shipping yard, Pier 4, midnight, come alone, you and the girl, no army, Morev, or the list burns, and so does your legacy. The line went dead. Victor slammed his fist on the desk. Zara, Freya! The two guards were in the room instantly. Lock her down, he commanded, his eyes black with rage. She is not to leave her wing. No! Alina grabbed his arm. Victor, no! You can't! He turned his face into a mask of fury. I am ending this. You will stay here. You will be safe. Safe? She cried, her fingers digging into his suit. You think locking me in a room is safe? He wants me. He used my name. He used her name. This is not your war. Victor, it's our war. You are not going alone. I will not risk you. Aliona. You're not risking me, she said, her voice dropping, her gaze fierce, meeting him. You are trusting me. You taught me that. Zara and Freya taught me that. I am not the girl in the container anymore. I am not your sister. I am the woman who is standing right here, telling you that you are not doing this alone. Tiny Odin, you are not alone. Do not leave me behind. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the steel in her spine. She was right. She was not a ghost to be protected. She was a warrior, forged in her own fire. To hide her now would be to dishonor her. He brought his hand up, cupping her face. Aliona, say yes, she whispered. He closed his eyes. Duh. The Red Hook shipping yard was a graveyard of rusted metal and shadow. The air was thick with salt and diesel. Victor and Alina arrived, not alone, but not with an army. 10 of his best men, including Sergei, had melted into the shadows of the containers an hour earlier. Victor and Alina walked into the open space under a single, flickering sodium lamp. Sean O'Malley was there, flanked by a dozen of his own men. He was a younger man than Victor expected, with ginger hair and a smirk that seemed permanently affixed to his face. Victor Morev, O'Malley said, clapping his hands, and the girl who started it all, Aliona. Or is it Alina? It's so hard to keep track. You're a long way from home, love. Alina's hand tightened inside her coat pocket, her fingers brushing the small, cold pistol Victor had given her. You have the ledger, Victor said, his voice flat. I do. O'Malley held it up. And in exchange, you're going to give me silence and territory, the entire Red Hook operation. It's mine. In return, I give you this list of ghosts, and I forget your little pet even exists. You think you can come into my city, blackmail my man, threaten me, and I will give you my territory? Victor asked, a dangerous quiet in his voice. I think your sister's name is worth it, O'Malley sneered. Or has she been gone so long you've forgotten her face? That was the last word he should have said. Now, Victor said. It was not a word. It was a command that detonated that night. Victor's hand was already moving, his own gun clearing his coat. Sergei, perched on a container, fired, and the lamp overhead exploded, plunging the yard into chaos, lit only by the muzzle flashes. O'Malley's men opened fire. Victor grabbed Alina, pulling her behind a stack of steel barrels. Bullets sparked off the metal. Stay here, Victor roared, but in the confusion, Two of O'Malley's men had circled. One grabbed Alina from behind, his arm locking around her throat. "Boss, I've got the girl!" She was being dragged, her feet scraping the gravel. She couldn't breathe, but she wasn't the girl from the container. She remembered Zara's voice, stomped the instep. Hard, Alina drove her heel down, crushing the man's foot. He roared, his grip loosening, elbow, solar plexus. She slammed her elbow back into his stomach. He gasped, the air exploding from his lungs. His arm was still around her. Wrist, twist, drop. She grabbed his wrist with both her hands, twisted it violently, and dropped her entire body weight. A wet, sickening snap echoed in the dark. He screamed. She was free. She rolled, grabbing the pistol from her pocket, her hands shaking but her purpose clear. Victor, who had just put 2 bullets into another man, saw her. He saw her escape. He saw her stand, weapon ready. A surge of terror and a fierce, burning pride ripped through him. He kicked another pistol toward her. "With me." She grabbed it. "Beside you," she corrected. Her voice shaking but firm. They moved as one. A dance of brutal efficiency, back to back. They were a fortress. He was a storm of precise, controlled violence. She was a survivor. Her shots less accurate but just as deadly. Driven by a desperation to live, the fight was short, brutal and loud. When it was over, the yard was silent, the air thick with the smell of cordite. Victor saw him, O'Malley. He was trying to crawl away, the ledger clutched in his hand. Victor stalked toward him, his face a mask of cold judgment. O'Malley tried to raise his gun. Victor kicked it from his hand. "My sister's name," Victor said, his voice a low growl. "You put her name in your mouth. She was just a name. Man," O'Malley spat, blood in his teeth. "Just a ghost." Victor ended it. One single, final sound. He stood over the body, his breath ragged. He picked up the ledger. "Victor." Alina was at his side. Her pistol lowered, he walked to the front of a truck, into the beam of its one remaining headlight. He opened the book. His hands, stained with battle, were trembling so hard he could barely turn the page. He found it. The page with the 2 names. Aliona Petrova. Status, escaped. Location, New York, USA. And below it, Katya Moreva. Status, deceased. Location, Moscow. There was a line through his sister's name, a single neat line, and a date from 15 years ago. She had died all those years ago. She was never trafficked. She was never in a container. She had died in Moscow, just died. He had been chasing a ghost. He had built an empire, funded shelters, destroyed men, all in the name of a rescue that was never possible. The hope that had fueled him, that had driven him for 20 years, was a lie. He didn't make a sound, but his legs gave out. He slumped against the truck, the ledger falling open to the ground. He slid down the metal grill until he was sitting in the dirt, his head in his hands. And Viktor Morev, the Pakhan of the New York Bratva, a man made of iron in winter, began to cry. He wept silent, agonizing, racking sobs for the boy he had been, for the sister he had lost, and for the hope that had just died. Alina didn't speak. She didn't offer apologies. She simply went to him. She dropped to her knees in the gravel and the blood, and she wrapped her arms around him. She pulled his head to her chest, her small hands holding his skull as if she could hold the pieces of his world together. She held him as he had held her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, clutching her like a dying man. His sobs muffled in her coat. She pressed her lips to the top of his head. "You saved someone else's sister," she whispered, her own tears falling into his hair. "You saved me." He held on to her, the living, breathing proof, and anchored himself to the one truth that was left in his world. In the aftermath, the Red Hook shipping yard was not a gravesite. It was a file cabinet. Viktor Morev, the man who had walked in expecting to bargain for a ghost, had emerged with a purpose. He had not just avenged his sister. He had been given her final, true epitaph. Deceased. Moscow. 15 years prior. The grief that followed was not the raw, burning anger of the last 2 decades. It was a deep, quiet ache, a mourning for a girl he could finally, truly, let go. And in her place, he had Aliona. The ledger was not a trophy, it was a weapon. But Victor, The man who had held his shattered boss as he wept was not the same man she had met in the cafe. He did not use the list for a bloody street war, to consolidate territory, or to exact revenge. He used it with the precision of a surgeon. From his study, the fortress on the hill, he waged a new kind of war. It was a war of information. He worked through back channels, layers of secrecy that even his own organization did not understand. Anonymous data packets, encrypted and untraceable, began arriving at the desks of a select few federal agents, men and women who were known to be incorruptible, who had been frustrated by the very rings Victor was now exposing. A call from a burner phone, his voice electronically disguised, would direct an FBI task force to a specific shipping container in Newark, freeing a dozen women. An email routed through servers in 3 different countries would provide the IRS with the exact financial movements to cripple the O'Malley organization's legal fronts. The ledger, combined with Victor's own vast intelligence, was a key. He was not just destroying a rival, he was dismantling the entire rotten infrastructure, newspaper headlines, which had once hinted at his own shadowy power, now screamed of his success, though they never knew his name. International trafficking ring shattered. Mysterious tip leads to dozens of arrests. Ivan the Terrible, notorious trafficker, named on the international watch list. While Victor tore down the old world, he built a new one for her. One rainy Tuesday, a month after the battle at the shipping yard, he entered the library. Alina, she was Aliona now, always to him, was curled on the sofa, not reading a library book, but a textbook for her literature class. He sat, not across from her, but beside her. He placed a simple, navy blue file folder on the cushion between them. She looked at it, then at him. "Open it," he said, his voice quiet. Inside was not a key card, it was a passport, a real, official, United States passport. On the cover, the embossed eagle gleamed. She opened it, her own face, a picture Zara had taken just last week, one where she was smiling, the shadows gone from her eyes, stared back. Her name, Aliona Petrova, was printed in clean, bold type. "How?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the name. "You are not a witness. You are a survivor. You provided, through my lawyers, anonymous testimony that was vital in the federal case." He said simply, "You are no longer a ghost. You are a citizen." Beneath the passport was another document, a scholarship letter. Not from the New Start Scholarship Fund, but from the university itself. A full, 4-year ride. "It is done, Aliona," he said, his voice heavy. "The O'Malley syndicate is broken. Sean is gone. The men who knew your face are either in prison or on the ground. Ivan is a hunted man. He will never set foot in this country again. You are safe." She looked at him, her heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it hurt, but she saw something in his eyes, a distance, a pain. "And now," he continued, his voice going flat, "you are free." She stared. "Victor? I have secured an apartment for you, in a safe building near the university, high security. It is yours. The lease is paid for 5 years. He did not look at her. He looked at the fireplace. "I am giving you the choice that was stolen from you, by Ivan, and then by me." Alina's blood ran cold. "Are you sending me away?" He turned to her then, his face a mask of such agonizing internal conflict that it took her breath away. "I'm letting you go. Aliona, you came into my life because I saw my sister. You stayed because you were a prisoner. You were trapped here by my enemies." "That is not true," she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I dragged you into my war. You have slept in my bed. You have fought by my side. You have held me while I broke. You have paid every debt. You owe me nothing." He finally met her gaze. "You are a citizen. You are a student. You have a future. You should not be tied to this, to me." He was terrified. The Pachan of the New York Bratva, the man who had faced down a dozen guns without flinching, was terrified of her answer. She closed the folder. She set it on the table. She stood up. "The girl you saved, Victor, the one you pulled from the cafe, Alina Rostova, she would be very grateful," she said, her voice clear and strong. He flinched, his face tightening, preparing for the blow. She would take the apartment and the scholarship, and she would thank you. And she would leave. She took a step toward him. He did not move. He was a statue, bracing himself. "But I am not her," she said, her voice softening. "I am Alyona Petrova, and I am not grateful. Victor, not for this." She placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. It was beating like a drum. "I am in love. Do you understand the difference?" He stared at her, his dark eyes wide, a universe of disbelief and hope warring within them. "You don't get to do this," she whispered, her other hand coming up to frame his jaw. "You don't get to save me and then decide I'm not strong enough to be here. You don't get to decide what I want. I am not staying because I am in debt. I am not staying because I am afraid of the world outside. I am staying because of this." She tapped his chest. "This is home. You are home. Do not offer me a life without you. Victor, you are my life." He made a sound, a low groan, and his arms came around her, pulling her against him, burying his face in her hair. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she had never felt so free. "Ya tebya lublyu," he murmured into her skin, the Russian words raw, torn from the deepest part of his soul. "I love you. God help me. Alyona, I love you." He did not take her to the new apartment the next morning, at sunrise. He woke her. He didn't say a word. He was dressed, not in a suit, but in dark jeans and a simple black cashmere sweater. He handed her a coat. They drove in silence, not in the armored sedan, but in a vintage, dark green Aston Martin that he drove himself. He drove them out of the fortress, away from the guards, and back into the heart of Brooklyn. He parked on the same street, across from the same small, quiet cafe. The sign on the door said, "Closed." "Victor?" she asked. He just took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He led her to the door. It was unlocked. He had done it. The cafe was exactly as she remembered, but it was pristine. It was empty, silent and filled with the soft, golden light of the early morning. A single pot of coffee was brewing, filling the air with the smell of their first meeting. He led her through the small tables. He led her to the back booth, his booth. He did not sit. He gestured for her to slide in. On the cracked vinyl seat, he sat across from her, in the exact spot he had been sitting that first day. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. He was no longer the terrifying shadow. She was no longer the invisible waitress. "When I first saw you," he said, his voice low, his accent thick and wonderful. "I was not seeing you. I was seeing a ghost. I heard your words, but I was hearing my past. I was not listening." He leaned forward, his powerful hands resting on the small table between them, palms up, an invitation, an offering. "I am listening now. Alyona," he whispered, his eyes dark and full. "Say it again." She knew. He wasn't asking for the memory of the boy. He was asking for himself. She smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that finally reached her eyes. She leaned forward, placing her small hands in his. His fingers closed around hers, a warm, strong cage that was not a cage at all. She said the words, the lullaby that had stopped his heart, the magic spell that had started it all. "Tishina, moi koroshi," she whispered. He closed his eyes, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Taine Odin?" His eyes opened. They were clear. "Tai vi bezopasnosti, tai liubim." She held his gaze, her heart full. "You are safe now," she translated, though she knew he didn't need it. "You are loved." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, drawing her out of the booth. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles, the ones that had once been bruised. "And so are you," he murmured. He framed her face, his hands gentle, and he kissed her. It was not the kiss of aching loneliness from the storm. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss from his study. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a kiss of promise. It was slow and deep and absolute. It was the end of a war and the beginning of a life. It tasted of coffee and the morning sun and the profound, unshakable certainty of home. They stayed for a long time, drinking coffee, talking about the future of literature classes and quiet mornings. Finally, the sun was high over Brooklyn. He stood and held out his hand for her. She took it. As they walked to the door, Alina glanced back at the booth. His heavy, black pistol, the one that had been his constant companion, his symbol of power and his burden, was sitting on the table. He had taken it off when he sat, and he had not picked it up. He saw her look. He looked at the gun, then at her. He gave his head a small shake, and his fingers tightened around hers. He was choosing love. He was choosing her. He was leaving the war behind. He pushed the door open. The bell above it jingled, a bright, cheerful sound that cut through the silence. Hand in hand, Viktor Morev and Alyona Petrova walked out of the cafe, leaving the shadows and the ghosts behind. They stepped out into the noise and the light of a brilliant New York morning. No longer strangers, no longer invisible, and no longer alone. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey with Viktor and Alina. Let us know where you are listening from in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. We would love to hear your thoughts on the story in English.